Negro back during slavery. There was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food, what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, that house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today because we still got some house niggers running around here. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school. You're nothing but a house Negro. And if someone come to you right now and say, let's separate, you say the same thing that the house Negro said on the plantation. What you mean separate? From America? This good white man? Where you gonna get a better job than you get here? I mean, this is what you say. I ain't left nothing in Africa. That's what you say. Why, you left your mind in Africa. On that same plantation, there was the field Negro. The field Negro, those were the masses. There was always more Negroes in the field than there was Negroes in the house. The Negro in the field caught hell. He ate leftovers. In the house, they ate high up on the hog. The Negro in the field didn't get nothing but what was left of the insides of the hog. They call them chitlins nowadays. In those days, they call them what they were, guts. That's what you were, a gut eater. And some of you all still gut eaters. The field Negro was beaten from morning till night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore cast-off clothes. And he hated his master. I say he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master. But that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority. And they hated the master. When the house caught on fire, he didn't try and put it out. That field Negro prayed for a wind, for a breeze. When the master got sick, the field Negro prayed that he died. If someone come to the field Negro and said, let's separate, let's run, he didn't say, where are we going? He said, any place is better than here.
Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live!
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam, Rasulullah, wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and final messenger. Family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the Feachaz. I greet you all in peace and love with no hatred in my heart. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. And family, let me see here. Family, this particular live, I've been trying to do this one for a while, a minute now. And after, I wanted to do this during Ramadan, but of course, it's going to be like a little bit, hectic trying to do it in Ramadan. So what I have done now, I have put something together that I wanted to cover for a minute. And before I get into this, just let me build up my argument first. Right, I'm going to show y'all some, basically some statements by, certain political figures that are carrying out a particular agenda in Africa and how it will eventually spill over to us over here, us black folk in the West. Now, we said before on this channel that colonialism is essentially slavery by another name. That's all it really is. The difference is with the transatlantic slave trade, you understand very well who's enslaving you. And with colonialism, what it is it's dressed under the guise of incompetent leaders and has really nothing to do with the leadership that you have within colonialism. It really has nothing to do with that because those leaders are selected by colonizers. And their job is to make sure that they extract as much wealth out of whatever country that you are under the thumb of as possible and use the local population as slave labor. So you never really see your enslavers in colonialism. So before we begin, let us watch a small clip from Professor Pielo Lumumba, and then we're going to get into it. 1 second, y'all. Like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon, y'all.
Nobody cares about us. And brothers and sisters, if you want to know how weak we are, and we are weak, look at how we are treated. Last month, the world met in New York, the General Assembly. When African heads of states and government are speaking, the hall is empty. Nobody bothers because they are saying nothing. Even if they are saying something, it is something that can be ignored. Compare when an African head of state and government is speaking and when the Prime Minister of Little Israel is speaking. They will listen because we are weak and disunited. So we have a weak continent because the spirit of Pan-Africanism disappeared. So the question that we can ask, what is the state of Pan-Africanism as we speak today? The African Union, which is weak, says the right things and does the wrong things 9 out of 10 times. And what are the critical areas in which we are weak? We are weak politically. because nobody listens to us. We are not trading with one another. Intra-African trade is not anything beyond 15%, the lowest anywhere in the world. If you look at all our sectors and look at them, look at our agriculture, almost all African countries are net food importers. There is not a single African country that is in meaningful technology. Not a single African country produces a mobile phone. Yet the single most important ingredient in mobile telephony is to be found in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So, family, before we continue, how does any of this apply to black folk in the West? When he is saying that Africans don't trade with one another, do black people out here trade with one another? When he is saying that we are weak politically in Africa, are black folk out in the West weak politically? When he is saying that Africans import their own food, despite the fact that they can practically feed the entire world. The starvation that's going on in Africa is 100% man-made. If you look at the black communities out here in the West, we are living in what is known as food deserts, where we don't produce our own food. And as a matter of fact, all the enemy has to do is turn the food supplies off, and then black folk within black communities will start starving within weeks. So what we're seeing is a global project. But don't stop there, because the global political brass has openly talked about recolonizing Africa, which is the next part I want to get into. 1 second, y'all. Like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon. 1 second, family. Let me get this up here. Now, I want y'all to watch this. This is from January 10th, 2021, okay? This is about an article that Boris Johnson wrote, and it was put out on the African Diaspora channel. Let's get this up, y'all. 1 second, family.
Quote, the best fate of Africa would be if the old colonial powers or their citizens scrambled once again in her direction, on the understanding that this time they will not be asked to feel guilty. Hello fam, welcome to the African Diaspora News Channel. I am Wangil Zalalam bringing you this report. Today's report comes from the UK. You know Boris Johnson, right? Their leader. I found an interesting article that he wrote in 2002 about Africa would have been better off if we get colonized again. I kid you not. I'll read for you the direct quote that this current leader now, then he was not a leader when he wrote this article. Let me read for you what he said, and we'll come back and talk. Johnson wrote in a 2002 article that colonialism in Africa should never have ended, arguing that Africans would not have grown the right crops for export if Britain had not directed them. He said, quote, the continent may be a blot, but it is not a blot upon our conscience. The problem is not that we were once in charge, but that we are not in charge anymore. In the wake of global anti-racism protests that have targeted monuments connected to slavery and colonialism, the British Prime Minister argued this week that such colonial era figures should not be toppled because they teach us about our past with all its faults. However, his 2002 articles show that Johnson has held the belief that British colonialism wasn't a disaster while dismissing Britain's role in slavery. He said, quote, consider Uganda, Pearl of Africa, as an example of the British record. Are we guilty of slavery? Sure. It was one of the first duties of Frederick Lugard, who colonized Uganda in the 1890s, to take on and defeat the Arab slavers. And don't swallow any of that nonsense about how we planted the wrong crops. The British planted coffee and cotton and tobacco, and they were broadly right. If left to their own devices, the natives would rely on nothing but the instant carbohydrate gratification of the plantain. The colonists correctly saw the export market was limited. And then he continued. Quote, the best fate of Africa would be if the old colonial powers or their citizens scrambled once again in her direction, on the understanding that this time they will not be asked to feel guilty. Like, what did I just read? That is a direct quote from him.
So, family, these folks want to make exploitation part and parcel with trade. Like we taught Africans how to export. Because these exports are somehow benefiting Africans. This is a one-way benefit street. This is not trade. What these Europeans do is they steal the resources from Africa and turn around and call that trade in order to absolve themselves from any guilt from what they have done and what they continue to do up until this day. But mind you, that was Boris Johnson in 2002 writing an article about the argument for recolonizing Africa. That was 2002 that he wrote that article. Well, let me show y'all something. What do we have here? Recolonizing Africa, a modern Chinese story. This is CNBC. This article was written in December 30th, 2014. China, one of the world's largest emerging investors, is ramping up investment in sub-Saharan Africa as a researchers for natural resources. See, what y'all got to understand is they look at us all exactly the same way. They look at us as slave labor in order to extract their natural resources. So when you look at slavery in the West and the abolishment of slavery, that was really, in fact, a bunch of smoke and mirrors. Because Western countries were under pressure by not just Europeans, but by South Asians, the Orient, Middle East, to re-enslave its most recently enslaved labor class of black folk. Because in those days, the way that you see oil today, cotton was back then. Cotton and sugar. And that's where you get things like the prison industrial country. It was born out of that reality. There were no prisons before the end of slavery. That was for us. That was meant to put us back into slavery. And so all you have is the extension of slavery with Jim Crow, with mass incarceration, and so on and so on and so forth. That's all you got. Now these folks, they can't leave Africa or Africans alone. So let's continue reading this article. China's economic growth has been a key narrative to the story economic miracle over the past 2 decades. Foreign direct investment in particular has played a prominent role in economic interactions with many developing countries. Once a major recipient of the FDI, it's now one of the largest emerging investors, especially in sub-Saharan African countries. It has investments in Nigeria, Sudan, South Africa, and Angola. All of these countries right now experiencing destabilization. Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise. But don't stop there. We're not done yet. I want y'all to see this one. One second, y'all. Let me just pull it up. So we saw Boris Johnson, right, about an article he wrote in 2002. We saw an article written by MSNBC This one, I believe it was like 2 months ago. Former Navy SEAL Eric Prince. Okay, let us see what he got to say. Like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon, family. Let's see what he got to say.
Then it's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually making their country a better
People on the
land.
left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Eric Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes.
The man you saw in that video.
Did y'all catch that? Just in case you missed it, let's do that one more again.
Put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris.
Does anybody see the irony or the contradiction here? How did they get like that? Let's say, for example, I accept your argument that the countries in Africa are all about lining their pockets and shopping in Paris. Excuse me, Mr. Eric Cracker Prince. How did France get rich to begin with?
Bombastic side eye. Criminal offensive side eye. Do you understand?
Why is it that countries like Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso and Guinea and all these French former African colonies are kicking the French out today? How did they get rich? If it wasn't for the French, that they themselves ripping off Africans and lining their pockets in order so that they themselves can shop in France.
Oh my God!
This was 2 months ago. See, y'all really, there comes a point in time, especially if you're a Muslim. It's one thing if you're black, but especially if you're Muslim, they're going to put a time that, like, if you don't know who your enemy is in 2024, then perhaps, yeah, maybe you should be recolonized and maybe you should be re-enslaved. Because Allah is making it very clear who your enemy is. And we still out here just pretending like they ain't fitting to do what they're about to do or fitting to say what they're about to say. What is happening in Haiti today? While these folks are shopping in France. Talk about their leaders are corrupt. Their leaders are corrupt. Who put those corrupt leaders in there? There's not a single African country except that these demons went into those countries, assassinated the leaders that they had had some competence, assassinated them, and put in the puppets for that very same purpose that he's complaining about right now. These people are demons. They are outright demons. Which brings us to, that was just the introductions, by the way, because we're getting into the meat right now, okay? I wanted to just build the case first, right? So look, family, as we are in the embryonic stages of global societal collapse, there are very powerful elements that are openly talking about the recolonization of Africa, as you just seen. Here in the West, the powers that shouldn't be are working very hard to eradicate Black history. And even alleged Muslim mouthpieces, alleged, we say alleged, family. Out here in the features, we call them alleged Muslims. Because for sure they are not our brothers. But I digress. Even alleged Muslim mouthpieces ventured into the very same project. We are not shy to say that anyone whose intent and motivated to uphold the systems of global white supremacy is not our brother. We're not shy to say that. And we pray, that Allah eviscerates all of them in this life and the hereafter. Ameen. And humiliates them in this life and the hereafter. Ameen. And Allah mentions in the Quran, in Surah Al-Araf, He says that, and who is more unjust than the one who invents a lie about Allah or denies his verses? Those will attain their portion of the decree until when our messengers come to them to take them in death, meaning the angels. They will say, where are those that you invoke besides Allah? Recently, we had a big thing. Sorry, this is not part of y'all. This is my interjection here. Okay. Recently, we had a big thing about Sneeko, talk about Christ as King, Andrew Tate reaffirming the Christ as King, and Ali Dawa coming out saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to say Christ as King in order to defend Sneeko." In order to defend Sneeko. So where are those who used to invoke besides Allah? They will say, they have departed from us and will bear witness against themselves that they were disbelievers. This is how our alleged brothers and sisters move. Our alleged ones. Alleged. Because we talked about the hierarchy in Saudi Arabia before. There's a hierarchy. There is a caste system. On the bottom of the caste system, you have your Bengalis and your Sri Lankese and your Indians, whatever, your Hindis, and the Africans, Black Africans, whatnot. These are all on the bottom. Then moving up in the caste system, you have your Egyptians, your Jordanians, okay? Then moving up in the caste system, you have your general Westerners or whatnot. This is how the Desert Arab thinks, okay? Then, of course, you have your local Saudis, you have your black Saudis on the bottom, and then you have your brown Saudis and your red Saudis, and of course the white Saudis on the top. Okay. And then, of course, above all of that is Allah. And above all of that is white people. That's how they think. That was before, I said this was long before MBS. They be worshiping white folks. You kidding me? Same thing with South Asians. The same thing. If you look at any South Asian politician anywhere in the world, right? If they're in the West, they will twitch and twirl and twerk for Zaddy. The most twitching you ever seen in your entire life. Why? Because they take in white folks as gods besides Allah. This is who they worship. Let's call it what it is today. It's not extreme. This is exactly how they move. Allah also says, Allah will enter among nations which had passed before you of jinn and mankind into the fire. Allah will enter who? Nations. Into where? The fire. Of who? Jinn and mankind. Every time a nation it will enter, it will curse its sister nation. So each time a nation, an entire nation, enters the fire, it will curse its sister nation. Until when they have all overtaken one another therein, the last of them will say about the first of them, our Lord, these, meaning the first of them, had misled us. What would they say? They would say, these have misled us. So give them a double punishment of the fire. He, Allah, will say, for each, meaning the first and the last, is a double punishment, but you don't know, okay? Yeah, all of y'all is getting a double punishment. All of y'all is getting a double punishment. It's amazing that we can read these ayat and still be clueless or bare minimum indifferent about these warnings from Allah. How does somebody read something like that and still run behind a white supremacist repeating their talking points? How does somebody do that? Trying to get in good with them. Somebody make it make sense. But I digress. Allah the Most High has made it his enemies very apparent on earth. It's not like they're hidden. They're not hiding. They're telling you that they're enemies in their speech. They're showing you that they're enemies in their actions. So those fraternizing with them, running defense for them, coddling them, and at the very same time have all kinds of work and vitriol and venom for the oppressed generations, they have traded the protection of Allah for the protection of the enemies of Allah. Are y'all catching it? They thought the enemies of Allah was going to save them. They weren't joking. They were serious about that. So these ayat, they're warnings for those of them who are alive and a prophecy for those who are dead. Even though we know and we understand this, it does not negate the fact that they still fully intend to make black people and the darkest skinned people of the earth bare minimum permanent underclasses, or just re-enslave them wholesale altogether without any rights whatsoever. This is coming. Our Christianity, when we, black folk, became Christians, did it protect us from the Christians? Yes or no? Did our Christianity, when we became Christians, did it protect us from the Christians? In the same way that our Christianity did not protect us from the Christians, our Islam does not protect us from Arabs. Who's enslaving Africans right now in Africa right now, today, in 2024? Who's doing it? Who's doing it? We're not talking about 100 years ago, 50 years. We're talking about today in 2024. You see, alhamdulillah for Islam, man. Islam is absolutely the truth. 100%. I have no doubt about that. There are some people that try to use the ayats of Allah in a manner to keep the people pacified. These are wicked people. I'm sorry to say it like that. I'm sorry to say it like that. If these ayat and these ahadith, they brought the ignorant, despised, downtrodden desert Arab from darkness into light, then there's no doubt it can do the same thing for us. No doubt. The blueprint is right there. But how your enemy uses the ayat, the ones in thobes and beers, that is, they out here trying to tell y'all to be quiet about what your problems. Just be quiet about your problems. Islam ain't about racism until it's about an Arab. Then it's about racism. You get it? You see the double standards? There are no double standards with Allah. Allah is al-adl, the most just. He is the most just. They can't bend and twist and morph the religion of Allah just to suit themselves, like it's just for them. Allah sent Islam for everybody. He didn't just send it just for them. May Allah bless you and reward you and multiply for you 1,000,000-fold, Sister Tika, with the 10 membership. Hayakumullah, may Allah reward you and bless you. Ameen, ameen, ameen. Ameen, hayakumullah, jazakallah khair. Allah also says in the Quran, He does not change the condition of a people until they change the condition of themselves. So black folk are very welcome. Welcome, marhaban, to remain a permanent slave if that's what you really want. Keep silent and keep coddling and pretending that what's happening is not happening and protecting your open and very open and very apparent enemies. Because they got beards and throws and they can say Salaam Alaikum on my Muslim brother. Keep doing that and see how far that gets you. Just keep doing that. Did the Prophet say something? Did he do that? Did he practice that? Is that what he practiced? When Bilal's mother was brought into conversation for his blackness, did the Prophet say something? Just say to Bilal, Bilal, don't worry about it. He's your Muslim brother, there's no racism in Islam. Is that what the Prophet said? Did he pander to the one who was wronging the wronged? Or did he absolutely, with harshness, deal with it very quickly? And not just quickly, but decisively, to make sure it didn't happen again. Which one is it? These folks trying to exclude you from the religion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. And y'all just going for it. But I digress again. That's another story for another time. Okay? Our Christianity didn't protect us from Christians, and our Islam doesn't protect us from Arabs. It doesn't. But rather, you see nations of the earth moving in unison to try to secure the natural resources of Africa and the human resources of black bodies globally. That's what's going on right now. So family, we're going to cut it off right there today. We're going to continue the series, inshallah. Because it's getting late. It's already 10 o'clock. It's my bedtime. Okay. But make sure y'all like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon. I thank everybody who joined me tonight. I want to thank Sister Tika for gifting the 10 members. Allah may Allah reward you and bless you and multiply for you a millionfold. Ameen. I want to thank Sister Iman, Brother Israel, Young Lion, and everybody else who joined us. Make sure you like, subscribe, share. Just remember, family, that this work we're doing here, inshallah, Allah will bless us in this life and the hereafter for doing this work. Because this is what Islam is supposed to do. Islam is supposed to lift the people up, not keep the people down. Don't let just because somebody got a large platform, and as the ayah that we read before, nations will be put in the fire. Nations. Don't let a large platform fool you. Do you know what nations is? Okay. Entire nations being put in the fire, one after the other. Who want to go to the fire because of the misguidance of some nation somewhere? Who want to do that? And the most misguided of nations in recorded history is absolutely the white supremacists and anybody that follows them. We don't care how big your beard is. You've got a beard, drag it on the floor, and a turban all the way up into the first heavens. We don't care. If you're down with a white supremacist, you are as misguided as Allah wills. If you are running defense for some cracker somewhere, the most oppressive people in recorded human history, and you still on their team, that you can run along to the hellfire along right with them. Anyways, family, Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you and bless you, and multiply it for all of you a millionfold. Subhanallah.